We Americans attribute the quote, "I may not agree with what you have to say, but will defend to the death your right to say it," a quote not from Voltaire, but by the biographer Evelyn Beatrice Hall of what she thought he may be thinking. We attribute that quote to the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. So, what does freedom of speech mean? Well, it doesn't mean that you can yell fire in a public space when there is no fire. From the Oxford Dictionary, freedom of speech is the right to express any opinion without censorship or restraint. The history of free speech in America is a complex and evolving narrative that reflects the nation's commitment to individual liberty and democratic ideals. Rooted in colonial times and shaped by various legal battles and societal shifts, this history highlights the ongoing tension between the right to express oneself and the need to balance this freedom with broader interests of society. The concept of free speech in America has its roots in the colonial era, where early settlers sought religious and political autonomy. The Massachusetts Body of Liberties in 1641 is often considered one of the earliest expressions of this freedom, guaranteeing that inhabitants have the right to freely speak their minds. As colonial tensions with Britain grew, so did the importance of free expression. Pamphleteers like Thomas Paine and John Dickinson used their writings to advocate for independence and rally public sentiment against British oppression. The adoption of the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment to the United States Constitution in 1791, marked a significant milestone. The First Amendment enshrined the rights of free speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition, providing a foundational framework for individual liberties. Despite the First Amendment, legal interpretations of the scope of free speech remained contested. The Sedition Act of 1798, during John Adams' presidency, led to the prosecution of individuals critical of the government. However, this period also saw the emerging concept of marketplace ideas, where diverse viewpoints contribute to a healthy democracy. In the early 20th century, the Supreme Court grappled with defining the limits of free speech. The landmark case Schenck v. United States in 1919 introduced the clear and present danger test, allowing restrictions on speech that presents an imminent threat to national security. Over the years, legal interpretations evolved. Cases like Brandenburg v. Ohio in 1969 established a more protective standard for political speech, requiring incitement to be both imminent and likely to lead to lawless action. The courts expanded protections to various forms of expression, including symbolic speech in Texas v. Johnson in 1989, hate speech, R.A.V. versus City of St. Paul in 1992, and even offensive speech, Snyder v. Phelps in 2011. The advent of the internet brought new challenges to the balance between free speech and other societal interests. Issues like online harassment, misinformation, and the role of social media platforms in moderating content have raised complex debates. The tension between preserving free speech and addressing harmful or extremist content continues to be a contemporary issue. Discussions include the role of platforms in content moderation, cancel culture, and the impact of speech on marginalized communities. The history of freedom of speech in America reflects a dynamic interplay between the right to express oneself and the need to safeguard broader social interests. It is a story of legal precedent, cultural shifts, and ongoing dialogues that continue to shape the nation's understanding of this fundamental right. The history of political correctness in America is a multifaceted narrative that reflects changing societal norms, cultural debates, and evolving language. Rooted in attempts to address discrimination and promote inclusivity, the concept of political correctness has been both praised for its aims and criticized for limitations on free speech.
There's a truth that we all know, and I've seen this before, man. We went through this in the Soviet Union. We went through this.
Really?
Yeah. Do you know where political correctness comes from?
No.
The Soviet Union. My ancestors were told in Russia, what you're saying is factually correct, but it's politically incorrect. And what it meant was it was inconvenient to the party line, to the party dogma. And we all lived in a society where you were forced to pretend to believe things in public that you didn't believe in private. And that is the direction we're moving with this issue and others.
Yep.
We're moving to a position where you cannot say the thing that you know to be true. Basic level, secondary school biology. You can't say it. And I know you've gone through this. You've said, you know, people shouldn't be fighting if whatever. And people come after you because they have to. Because they don't have an argument. They have to destroy the person instead of destroying the argument, because there is no argument to
The
that.
term political correctness emerged in the mid-20th century, primarily within leftist circles. It was initially used to promote language and policies that were sensitive to issues of race, gender, and other social inequalities. However, the idea of political correctness came from Russian propaganda that restricted free speech when it came to criticizing the Russian government. The civil rights era of the 1950s and 1960s played a pivotal role in raising awareness about discriminatory language and practices. Advocates pushed for changes in language to reflect more equitable and respectful terms, such as African American versus Negro, and now Black versus African American, as one can be Black but not African American, and vice versa. The feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s highlighted gender-based inequalities, leading to discussions about language that perpetuated gender stereotypes. The movement aimed to challenge sexist language and encourage more inclusive terminology. The 1980s and 1990s saw a surge in discussion about political correctness on college campuses. Student activists pushed for inclusive language and curriculum that reflected a diverse range of perspectives, leading to debates about academic freedom. As political correctness gained prominence, it also faced backlash from various quarters. Critics argued that it stifled open dialogue and led to self-censorship, limiting the exchange of ideas and potentially infringing on freedom of speech. The concept of political correctness became a topic of broader public discourse in the late 20th century. Political commentators and comedians, for instance, often used it as a subject of satire or criticism.
About America, land of the free, home of the brave. We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country. Dumbass motherfuckers.
Too angry tonight because, you know, I am angry about a lot of things. I'm sure you are too. I tell you what I'm mostly pissed off about. I am mostly pissed off that not enough people are pissed off.
The rise of the internet in the 21st century transformed discussions around political correctness. Online platforms provided spaces for both amplifying marginalized voices and sparking continuous debates about the limits of acceptable language. The concept of intersectionality, which acknowledges the interconnected nature of different forms of oppression, brought new dimensions to discussions of political correctness. This emphasized the importance of addressing multiple marginalized identities. In recent years, debates about political correctness have continued to evolve. Conversations center on issues like cultural appropriation, language sensitivity, historical context, and the balance between free expression and respecting diverse perspectives. Many argue for a nuanced approach to political correctness, emphasizing the importance of respectful language while also fostering open dialogue and critical thinking. The history of political correctness in America reflects an ongoing dialogue about language inclusivity and the balance between promoting social equity and safeguarding freedom of expression. It remains a complex and evolving aspect of the nation's cultural landscape, reflecting both progress and ongoing challenges in creating an inclusive society. From orc.org.uk, that's Oxford, Cambridge, RSA meaning the Royal Society of Arts, it is written that value and norms shape a person's identity. That is, how they see themselves and how others see them. Marxists argue that the most significant part of a person's identity is their social class. A full link to this PDF document and all cited sources is in the description for you to read at your convenience. An example of political correctness in its original Russian definition would be for me, a Black American, to claim that President Reagan was great for all of America. Freedom of speech would be me saying that Reagan was to Black Americans as Hitler was to Jews. While the American take on political correctness, one that has very little to do with politics, unlike the Russian origin of the term, has good intentions, like removing words like nigger and faggot from our lexicon, but it has become more and more sinister. So much so, it is now the norm to disregard scientific fact by claiming that there are more than two genders, or that body dysmorphia or transgenderism isn't a mental illness when it has been classified in the DSM 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, in the DSM 5, if it is defined as clinically significant stress or impairment related to gender incongruence, which may include desire to change primary and or secondary sex characteristics. Not all transgender or gender diverse people experience gender dysphoria. There is so much to unpack in that last sentence. So let's start with what the DSM actually is. The DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is the handbook used by healthcare professionals in the United States and much of the world as the authoritative guide to the diagnosis of mental disorders. The most current version of the DSM is the fifth version. In previous versions of the DSM, transgenderism was classified as body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphic disorder is a mental illness involving obsessive focus on a perceived flaw in appearance. The flaw may be minor or imagined, but the person may spend hours a day trying to fix it. The person may also try many cosmetic procedures or exercise excessively, think bulimia and other eating disorders. Let's briefly talk about some of the other changes that the DSM has made with the fifth version. The DSM 4 subtypes of schizophrenia, which are paranoid, disorganized, catatonic, undifferentiated, and residual, were eliminated due to their limited diagnostic stability, low reliability, and poor validity. Schizophrenia is still diagnosed, but no longer under these subtypes because there was found to be no difference in brain functioning between the subtypes, and the subtypes also did not help predict how the condition would play out over time. There is a school of thought believed by some that people who suffer from schizophrenia, and I'm paraphrasing here, are not mentally disconnected but are more aware of the world in which we cannot see, and that they cannot verbally express what they see or how they see in terms that we, who do not suffer from this disorder, can understand. Now, declassifying schizophrenia as a mental disorder based on that school of thought is a terrifying yet unrealistic action to take. To remove such a serious disorder, such as schizophrenia, from the DSM would lead to societal breakdowns. The same argument was made in social discourse when transgenderism was declassified. Now we are made to believe that there are more than two genders, and I am excluding intersex because that is technically a gender, but an uncommon one that does not have roots in mental illness, but rather a physiological abnormality. This is especially disconcerting because this particular way of changing not only the landscape of linguistics, but also scientific fact reminds me of a book written way back in 1949 and shortly before his death, titled 1984. The book presents a dystopian view of the world which has been taken over by totalitarianism, one in which up is down is up, and 2 plus 2 equals 5. We scoff now at the idea of declassifying such serious mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, but before 2013, when the DSM 5 was published, we scoffed at the idea of transgenderism being a lifestyle versus a mental disorder. Yes, the DSM has removed certain things like actual lifestyles, such as homosexuality, because as we have freedom of speech, we are able to have an open dialogue about it. But the removal of transgenderism sparked this war on science that is now forbidden to even mention. I'm posting this video to Rumble and the audio to my podcast because I know that if I were to publish this on YouTube, or anywhere else, I'd have flags and strikes and everything else to get me to take this down. Is that freedom of speech? I understand that YouTube is not America and it has its own rules that content creators must follow. However, the fact that people can get on there and say things like there are more than two sexes and not be flagged seems a bit counterproductive and one sided. But this isn't meant to be a dissertation on the LGBTQIABCDE or F, but I use the example of transgenderism to highlight my point. We have entered an age of cultural Marxism, and there's little that we can do to stop it. Let's talk about cultural Marxism, as its definition has many interpretations. Wikipedia, an unreliable source, defines cultural Marxism as a far right, anti Semitic conspiracy theory which misrepresents the Frankfurt School as being responsible for modern progressive movements, identity politics, and political correctness. Okay, so what is the Frankfurt School? The school was founded in 1923 in Frankfurt, Germany, and its members were critical of the effects of technology and capitalism on society. They developed a critical theory that analyzed the roles and impacts of big businesses, monopolies, technology, and capitalism on people and communities. It refers to a group of German American theorists who developed powerful analyses of the changes in Western capitalist societies that occurred since the classical theory of Marx. So they applied Marxism to a radical interdisciplinary social theory highlighting political correctness. So, if we're to trust Wikipedia and go by that definition, this Frankfurt School or Institute for Social Research, created by Marxist followers and affiliated independently of the Communist Party, has been misrepresented. How? How is it derogatory to use the term cultural Marxism when it is literally the purpose of the Frankfurt School? How is it anti Semitic? Is it because Karl Marx was Jewish? He was a self hating Jew. No, seriously, he hated Jewish people. This guy, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, stated the net result of Marx's essay is to reinforce a traditional anti Jewish stereotype. In an analysis of political emancipation, Marx concluded that while individuals can be spiritually and politically free in a secular state, they can still be bound to material constraints on freedom by economic inequality, an assumption that would later form the basis of his critiques of capitalism. The man was a self hating Jew who wanted to escape the persecutions brought toward his people by eliminating religion altogether. He hated Black people too. The only difference between Marx and Hitler is that Marx never ordered the slaughter of anyone that we know of, and he was a communist. So the term cultural Marxism is anti Semitic because Karl was Jewish or because he himself was an anti Semite? Let's have an open, honest, and respectful discussion in the comments below. Or if you're listening to the podcast, write into tqtpod@gmail.com, or you can leave me a voice message on anchor.fm. I think it's Spotify now. I don't know. Whatever Anchor used to be, about your thoughts. Next week in part 2, we'll be discussing how society breaks down under this school of thought, and we'll be predicting some future outcomes if we don't make a change in soon. Thanks for watching.